My name is Sarah Millsbury. 3 years ago, a single sheet of paper cost me my family's legacy, my home, and my identity. My grandfather's last will, signed in the shadow of his illness, left the 800-acre farm that had been in our family for 5 generations not to me, the one who worked it, but to the uncle who barely visited. And then I discovered the signature of the woman who witnessed it was the same woman my uncle had been secretly seeing for years. This is the story of Millsbury Farm and how a legacy built on sweat and soil for over a century was nearly stolen in a single afternoon. I was the granddaughter who stayed, who learned every acre and every cow by name. So why did my grandfather's final act seem to erase me completely? To understand that, you have to go back to the last summer he was truly himself, and the dinner where I first saw the plan forming in my uncle's eyes. It was July, and the Missouri heat hung over the fields like a blanket. My grandfather, Robert, he was 78 and still stronger than any man I knew. We were baling hay that afternoon, just the two of us, when he stopped the tractor, looked out over the west pasture and said, "This is all going to be yours one day, Sarah. You're the only one who sees it as something alive." That was the summer of 2017. Millsbury Farm wasn't just land, it was 800 acres of bottomland and rolling hills, a herd of 200 cattle, 4 barns my great-great-grandfather had raised by hand. I'd worked it full-time since I was 22 after getting my agriculture degree. My uncle Jim, my father's older brother, he'd left for Springfield when he was 18. He sold insurance, visited on major holidays, and always called it the old homestead, like it was a museum, not a working farm. The difference between us was never clearer than at that Sunday dinner in August. Grandpa's health had started its slow fade, a fall, a broken hip that never healed right. Jim drove down with his girlfriend, Eleanor Vance. Now, Eleanor was a family attorney from Jefferson City. She handled Grandpa's affairs for years, polite, sharp-eyed, always taking notes on a legal pad she carried in her purse. That night, over my grandmother's peach cobbler, Jim leaned forward. "Dad, you need to think about the future. This place is a lot for anyone. The taxes alone," he made it sound like a burden. Grandpa just grunted, but I saw his knuckles whiten around his fork. After dinner, I was clearing plates when I heard them in the study. The door was cracked, Jim's voice low. "Eleanor can draw up something that protects everyone, a trust maybe. We just need to make it official while you're still of sound mind." Sound mind? He said it like he was diagnosing him. That was the first time I felt a real chill, the first time I saw the blueprint. Now, before we go further, if you've ever had a family member start talking about legal protections right after dessert, you know that feeling. Drop a yes in the comments. Let's keep going, because what happened next was a masterclass in pressure. Grandpa's health declined fast that fall, congestive heart failure. By Thanksgiving, he was on a dozen medications. The man who taught me to drive a combine now got confused about what day it was. Jim's visits became weekly, and he never came alone. Eleanor was always with him, her briefcase in hand. They'd spend hours in the study with the door closed. When I'd bring in coffee, the conversation would stop. Papers would be shuffled. One time, I saw a document header, "Last Will and Testament." I asked Grandpa about it later, sitting on the porch. He patted my hand, his own trembling slightly. "Just paperwork, honey. Jim's taking care of things." His eyes were cloudy, distant. The medications did that. But here's the crucial piece I wouldn't learn until much later. Those paperwork sessions, they weren't just about the will. Jim and Eleanor were also quietly transferring non-farm assets, a stock portfolio, a lake house, into a separate trust in Jim's name, isolating the farm, making it the only big thing left to fight over. They were boxing it in. The hammer fell in early December. Grandpa was rushed to the hospital with pneumonia. He was in the ICU on oxygen, barely conscious. I stayed there day and night, sleeping in a chair. Jim flew in from a business trip 2 days later. He walked into that hospital room with Eleanor, not with flowers, with a notary public, a man in a cheap suit clutching a briefcase, looking deeply uncomfortable. I was in the hallway getting coffee. I heard Jim's voice, firm, cutting through the beep of the monitors. "Dad, we need you to sign this. It's the updated will. Remember we talked about it? It protects the farm." I pushed the door open. "He can't sign anything. Look at him." Grandpa's eyes were half closed, his breathing ragged. The nurse had just increased his morphine drip. Eleanor stepped between me and the bed. "Sarah, this is a legal matter. Your grandfather's wishes need to be documented. The notary is here to verify his competence." Competence? He didn't know what year it was. I looked at the nurse, who glanced away, powerless. I saw the document then on the hospital tray table. A single signature line at the bottom, waiting. And I saw my grandfather's hand, guided by Jim's, scrawl a shaky, looping R before the pen dropped. They got what they came for. The notary stamped it. Jim folded the document, placed it in Eleanor's briefcase, and they left. They didn't ask about his prognosis. They didn't ask if I needed anything. They'd gotten the signature. 2 weeks later, just after New Year's, my grandfather passed away in that same bed. I was holding his hand. Jim was already back in Springfield, making arrangements. The reading of the will was held in Eleanor Vance's law office 1 week after the funeral. The room was oak-paneled, cold. My grandmother, devastated, sat silently. My father, a quiet man who'd always deferred to his older brother, stared at the floor. Jim looked confident. Eleanor, now acting as the executor, opened the document. She read the legalese in a flat, professional tone, and then she got to the disposition of assets. The stock portfolio of the lake house, already transferred to James Millsbury via Inter Vivos Trust. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Then she read the part about the farm. I devise, give, and bequeath all my right, title, and interest in the property known as Millsbury Farm, comprising approximately 800 acres, together with all livestock, equipment, and outbuildings, to my son, James Robert Millsbury. There was a clause, a single cruel clause about me. For my granddaughter, Sarah Elaine Millsbury, I leave the sum of $50,000 in recognition of her service. Service, like I was a hired hand, not an heir. A paid employee being dismissed. The room spun $50,000. The farm was appraised at over $12 million. Jim didn't look at me. He adjusted his tie. My grandmother gasped, started crying. My father finally looked up, his face a mask of confusion. But Dad always said. Jim cut him off. Dad wanted to keep the farm whole in strong hands. He knew what he was doing. I found my voice, but it was a whisper. That document he signed was when he was drugged. You brought a notary to his deathbed. Eleanor Vance looked at me over her glasses. The will is dated and notarized. It reflects your grandfather's testamentary capacity. I was there. I witnessed his sound mind. I stood up, my chair scraping loud on the floor. I looked at my uncle, at the attorney who was supposedly a neutral party, and I said the only thing I could think of. You've been dadding for 3 years. The whole family knows. How can you possibly witness a will that leaves everything to your own boyfriend? The color drained from Jim's face. Eleanor's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing pure, cold fury. That's when I knew this wasn't just greed. This was a conspiracy. And I had just declared war in a lawyer's office with $50,000 and a lifetime of dirt under my fingernails to my name. But what I didn't know, as I walked out of that office into the freezing January air, was that my uncle had already made his first move to secure his prize. And it didn't involve lawyers. It involved a man named Carl, a shotgun, and a deadline to get off my own land by the end of the week. I drove back to the farm in a daze, the $50,000 clause ringing in my ears. My truck was barely in the driveway when I saw him. Carl Jepson, a local guy who'd done odd jobs for Jim before, was leaning against his pickup, a shotgun propped against the tailgate. He didn't smile. Afternoon, Sarah, Jim sent me. You got till Sunday to clear your personal things out of the main house. Sunday, it was Wednesday. The cold January air bit through my coat. This is my home, Carl. He spat on the gravel. Not according to the will, it ain't. Jim's the owner now. He says you're a trespasser once you gone before he takes formal possession. I looked past him to the house, the porch where my grandmother's rockers sat, the field stretching out behind it. This wasn't legal process. This was a show of force. I kept my voice steady. You tell my uncle that if he wants me off this land, he'll need more than you and a shotgun. He'll need a court order and a sheriff. I walked past him into the house and locked the door. My hands were shaking. I called the only person I thought might help, Aunt Ruth, not a real aunt, but my grandfather's sister, the family skeptic who'd never trusted Jim. She answered on the second ring. I heard, she said, her voice grim. Eleanor Vance just filed the will with probate court. It's official now. Then she told me something that changed everything. You need a lawyer, honey, a mean one, and I know just who to call. The lawyer's name was Marcus Thorne. His office was in Kansas City, not a small-town practice. He specialized in fiduciary litigation, which is a fancy way of saying he sued people who stole from families. Ruth had used him years ago when a business partner screwed her over. I drove up the next day, the $50,000 from the will feeling like a sick joke in my bank account, my retainer. Marcus was in his 60s, built like a retired linebacker with a wall of books behind him and no small talk. I told him the whole story, the hospital room, the notary, the relationship between Jim and Eleanor Vance. He listened, took notes on a yellow legal pad, and when I finished, he set his pen down. The undue influence claim is obvious. The confidential relationship between attorney and client, the beneficiary dadding the attorney, the testator's diminished capacity. It's textbook. He leaned forward, but challenging a will is a brutal, expensive process. Your uncle will fight dirty, he'll drag your name through the mud, he'll say you were coercing your grandfather, that you're just a greedy kid. You ready for that? I looked at a framed quote on his wall. It read, "The truth is messy, inconvenient, and has a terrible memory." I nodded. I have nothing left to lose. But here, where the story twists, Marcus filed the petition to contest the will in probate court, the standard move, but he also did something else. He subpoenaed Eleanor Vance's firm for all communications related to my grandfather's estate planning for the past 5 years, and he subpoenaed my uncle's bank records. This wasn't just about the will anymore. This was a financial excavation, and what he dug up was worse than we imagined. 2 weeks later, Marcus called me into his office. He had documents spread across a huge table. We were looking in the wrong place, he said, pointing to a series of statements. The will was the finale. The real play happened months before. He showed me a trust document dated March of 2017, 4 months before that pivotal Sunday dinner, the Millsbury Family Revocable Trust. It had been created by Eleanor. And in it, my grandfather's non-farm assets, about $2.3 million in stocks, bonds, and the lake house, were transferred out of his direct ownership and into the trust. The sole trustee, James Millsbury, the successor trustee, Eleanor Vance. This was signed when your grandfather was healthy, Marcus said. It's harder to challenge, but look at the beneficiary designation. The trust assets passed outright to Jim upon Robert's death, not to the estate, not subject to the will. It was a clean, preemptive strike. They'd siphoned off the liquid wealth first, making the farm the big, messy, contested prize. Jim would get the money no matter what. The will was just for the land. I felt the room tilt. It was so calculated. Why would Grandpa have told me? Marcus gave me a look that was almost pity. He might not have fully understood these documents are dense, or he might have been assured it was just a tax strategy. By the time the will was changed, the money was already gone. This was the major pivot. This wasn't a single moment of weakness in a hospital bed. This was a campaign that started when my grandfather was still mostly himself. A campaign built on the trust he placed in his son and his longtime attorney. Okay, I need to pause here. If you've ever realized someone was planning against you long before you even saw it coming, type calculated in the comments. This changes everything, doesn't it? Let's keep going because the legal war was about to go very, very public. The probate court hearing was set for April. The local paper, the Springfield News Leader, got wind of it. Family farm feud erupts in court was the headline. My grandmother, God bless her, gave an interview on her front porch. She said, "My husband wanted Sarah to have that farm. He told me so every day. What Jim did is a sin." The community split. Some longtime neighbors brought me casseroles and told me to fight. Others whispered that I was causing a scene, that I should take the money and be grateful. Jim, meanwhile, played the wounded son. He gave a statement about carrying on his father's legacy and making the tough decisions to keep the farm viable. He never mentioned Aliner. Then the first major break. Marcus got the documents from the subpoena, and buried in hundreds of pages of emails between Aliner and Jim, he found it. An email from Jim to Aliner dated the day before the hospital's signing. The subject line, "Final draft for tomorrow." The text read, "Attached is the version we discussed. The specific disinheritance clause for S is on page 4. Make sure the notary is discreet. Dad's lucidity comes and goes, so we need to move fast during a window." Marcus read it to me over the phone. I was in the barn milking a cow. I sat down on a hay bale. He called me S like I was a problem to be managed, and he was scheduling my grandfather, lucidity windows. This was the smoking gun. This was proof of intent. We filed the email as evidence. The probate judge, a stern woman named Judge Wilkins, ordered a full evidentiary hearing. The mood shifted. Jim's lawyer, some big shot from St. Louis, started offering settlement discussions. They offered me $200,000 to drop the case and sign a non-disparagement agreement. Marcus advised me to consider it. "It's a lot of money, Sarah. Trials are unpredictable." I looked out the window of his office at the city skyline. $200,000 was life-changing money, but it was also a bribe to stay quiet. It was my uncle buying my silence and my family's history for pennies on the dollar. I said no. The hearing began in a packed courtroom. Jim and Aliner sat at the defendant's table, not looking at each other. I took the stand first. Marcus walked me through it all: my work on the farm, my grandfather's promises, the hospital scene. Then he showed me the email on the courtroom screen. "Do you recognize this, Ms. Millsbury?" I read it aloud, my voice echoing. Asterisk, "Dad's lucidity comes and goes, so we need to move fast during a window." I looked right at my uncle. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Then Marcus called Aliner Vance to the stand. He didn't ask about the will at first. He asked about her professional rules, the Missouri Rules of Professional Conduct, specifically the rule that a lawyer cannot prepare an instrument giving a substantial gift to themselves or a person with whom they have a sexual relationship. He asked her point blank, "Ms. Vance, are you currently in a romantic relationship with the primary beneficiary of this will, James Millsbury?" The room went utterly silent. She adjusted her glasses. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination." You could hear a gasp from the spectators. A lawyer taking the fifth in a civil case is devastating. It screams guilt. Jim's attorney objected, but the damage was done. In the eyes of everyone in that room, the impartial executor had just admitted she was anything but. Judge Wilkins ruled from the bench 2 weeks later. She found clear and convincing evidence of undue influence. She invalidated the will. The farm would pass according to my grandfather's asterisk previous will dated 2014. That will split the estate evenly between his two sons, my father and Jim. And my father, in a move that stunned everyone, immediately deeded his half-interest to me. The farm was half mine. Jim owned the other half. We were now locked in a bitter partnership, tied to the land we both claimed. But Jim wasn't done. If he couldn't own it all, he would break it. He refused to cooperate on anything. He blocked essential repairs. He wouldn't agree on selling cattle. The farm began to suffer, and then he made his most vicious move. He went to the local farm credit bureau. He presented himself as the half-owner, and he took out a massive loan against his half-asterisk of the property's value, $600,000. He didn't need my signature because the title was still in the estate's name, pending final resolution. He took the cash and left the debt attached to the land. It was a poison pill. If I couldn't buy him out or pay down that loan, the whole farm could be foreclosed on. He was trying to force a fire sale. I got the notice from the bank in July, notification of co-debtor. I had 30 days to cure the default or they would begin foreclosure proceedings on the entire property. I drove to Jim's insurance office in Springfield. I didn't call first. I walked right in past his receptionist. He was on the phone, laughing. He hung up slowly when he saw me. "Sarah, you look stressed." I threw the bank notice on his desk. "What is this?" He barely glanced at it. "A business decision." My half of the asset, my collateral. You want to keep the farm so bad, get a loan and pay it off. He smiled. It was the same smile from the dinner table. Or maybe you should just sell your half to me, I'll give you a fair price. Well, a discounted price considering the debt. I left without another word. The fight had just escalated from a courtroom to the brink of financial ruin. Marcus was furious, but there were limited options. The loan was legally valid. My only hope was to find a way to secure my own financing to buy Jim's half and assume the crushing debt or lose everything. I spent nights awake, running numbers that never added up. The farm was my home, but it was also becoming an anchor dragging me under. And then an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single grainy photocopy of a check from James Millsbury to Eleanor Vance dated 2 months before my grandfather's death. The amount, $25,000. The memo line read, estate planning retainer. But it wasn't from a business account, it was from a personal checking account I didn't recognize, and scrawled in the corner in handwriting that was Jim's or Eleanor was a note, look at the account, Ridgeview Trust. I had no idea who sent it, but it was a thread, and if I pulled it, the entire tapestry of their scheme might finally unravel. I stared at that photocopied check in my kitchen, the farm silent around me. A $25,000 retainer from my uncle to his girlfriend, paid from an account I'd never heard of. Ridgeview Trust, it felt like a key to a door I didn't know existed. I called Marcus, my voice shaky. He was quiet for a long time. Don't touch it, he finally said. Forward the envelope to me, don't tell anyone, and Sarah, start thinking about who in your uncle's circle would want to burn him. That question kept me up at night. Jim's circle was small, business associates, a few old friends, Eleanor. It felt like a dangerous game, trusting a shadow, but the clock was ticking on the bank loan. I met with a farm credit officer, a weary man named Ben. I showed him the numbers, my half ownership, the debt Jim had strapped to the land. Ben shook his head. Even with your equity, servicing this debt with current farm income, it's a stretch. A big one, you'd be one bad season from default. He was telling me I couldn't win. The poison pill was working. Then Marcus called. His voice had a new energy. Ridgeview Trust, he said, it's not a bank, it's a private fiduciary trust company based in the Cayman Islands, niche, expensive, used for moving money discreetly. He'd had a colleague dig deeper. The check was a fee, but not for legal services. Ridgeview specializes in asset protection and, wait for it, medically administered estate planning. My blood went cold. Medically administered? It's a euphemism, Marcus said, his tone grim. They facilitate transfers for individuals with declining capacity. They have doctors on retainer to provide capacity assessments that are remarkably convenient. The pieces slammed together. The hospital signing wasn't an opportunistic grab, it was a scheduled transaction. Jim and Eleanor hadn't just found a notary, they'd likely used a network. That check wasn't a retainer for a will, it was a payment for a service. A service to make the will stick. This was bigger, colder, and far more professional than a simple family spat. My uncle had outsourced the theft of my inheritance. Marcus warned me this changed the game. If they used a service like this, there will be a paper trail, but it will be buried under layers of attorney-client privilege and offshore secrecy. We need to go on the offensive, we need to force it into the open. His plan was audacious. He filed a new motion in probate court alleging not just undue influence but civil conspiracy and fraudulent conveyance. He named Ridgeview Trust as a third-party defendant. He was essentially suing a shadowy Cayman Islands company in a Missouri farm town. It was a legal Hail Mary. The local paper ate it up. The headline read, "Farm Feud Goes International." The court date was set, the pressure on Jim was visibly mounting. He stopped coming to the farm altogether, but the bank debt was still there, a time bomb. Then the second anonymous package arrived. This one was a USB drive left in my mailbox, no note. I took it to Marcus's office. On it was a single audio file, we plugged it in. The quality was poor, muffled, but the voices were unmistakable. Jim and Eleanor having an argument. The date stamp was from just after the will was invalidated. Jim's voice, snarling, told you we should have used the doctor from Ridgeview's list, not that idiot from the hospital. His notes were garbage. Eleanor, defensive, he was available and he signed the capacity form for $1,000. It should have held up. Jim again, well, it didn't, now we're exposed, and if anyone looks at that Ridgeview payment, a long pause, then Eleanor, cold as ice, they'd need the ledger. And that's not in Missouri. Marcus stopped the recording. He looked at me, a hard light in his eyes. This isn't just about your farm anymore, Sarah. This is about a system. They're talking about a fraudulent medical assessment. That's not just civil, that's potentially criminal, conspiracy to commit fraud. He picked up his phone. I'm calling the Missouri Attorney General's office and the FBI. Here, where it gets worse, so much worse, the AG's office was interested. They opened a preliminary inquiry, but a week later I got a visit, not from the FBI, from a man in a suit who introduced himself as a representative of Ridgeview Trust legal counsel. He met me at Marcus's office. Calm, polite, terrifying, he didn't discuss the case, he discussed me. He knew where I'd gone to school. He mentioned the name of my college boyfriend. He talked about the stress of litigation, how it could impact one's health and safety. It was a threat wrapped in immaculate courtesy. Marcus threw him out, but the message was received. We were poking a hornet's nest with global connections. The legal gears began to grind. The AG's inquiry triggered something, subpoenas flew, and then the break. A forensic accountant working for the state digging into Jim's finances found a series of wire transfers, not just the $25,000. Multiple payments over 3 years from an LLC Jim controlled to Ridgeview Trust, totaling over $200,000, and the memos were chilling. Project Harvest Phase 1, Project Harvest Phase 2. My family's farm had a project code names. Marcus laid it out for me. Phase 1 was the Inter Vivos Trust siphoning off the cash assets. Phase 2 was the will and the medical certification grabbing the land. This was a multi-year, paid-for operation. Your uncle didn't just get greedy when your grandfather got sick. He planned this when your grandfather was healthy. The scale of the betrayal was so vast it felt unreal. This wasn't a spontaneous sin. It was a corporate takeover of a family. The public fallout was nuclear. The AG held a press conference. He announced a widening investigation into predatory estate planning schemes targeting the elderly. He didn't name names, but everyone knew. Jim was suspended from his insurance firm. Alina Vance's law firm placed her on indefinite leave. Their names were in the paper every day. The community that had been split now turned solidly against them. The casseroles stopped coming to my door, replaced by a kind of odd, uncomfortable silence. I wasn't the poor granddaughter anymore. I was the one who'd accidentally triggered a scandal. But in the middle of this, the farm was dying. The loan was in default. The bank sent a final notice. All the legal wins in the world wouldn't matter if I lost the land at auction. I was out of options, out of time, and emotionally hollow. I drove to the highest hill on the property, the one my grandfather loved, and I just sat there. I was ready to let it go. The fight had cost me too much. So when my phone rang, an unknown number with a New York area code, I almost didn't answer. A woman's voice, crisp, professional. Sarah Millsbury, my name is Anya Petrova. I represent the Agricultural Conservation Legacy Fund. We've been following your case. We think we have a solution. I was too tired to be skeptical. What kind of solution? A buyout, she said. We facilitate the purchase of Atrisk family farms to place them under permanent agricultural conservation easements. We would buy your uncle's half interest at fair market value, assume the debt, and you would retain ownership of your half, with the easement protecting it from development forever. But we need both owners to agree, and we need to move fast. It was a lifeline, a way to save the farm's soul if not its full financial potential. But it required Jim's signature, and Jim was now facing a state investigation and possible criminal charges. His legal bills must have been astronomical. He was vulnerable. This was the leverage I needed. Marcus crafted the offer. We would buy Jim's half for $1 over the appraised value of his share, minus the $600,000 debt he'd taken on. He'd walk away with a little cash instead of a mountain of legal liability. And in return, we would not pursue him for civil damages. It was a settlement wrapped in an escape route. We sent the papers to his lawyer. The silence lasted 5 days, then the word came back. He wanted a second term, a non-prosecution agreement from the state. He wanted immunity. Marcus laughed, a dry, harsh sound. He doesn't get to dictate that. The AG isn't party to this deal. We waited. The bank's foreclosure auction was posted. The date was 3 weeks away. Then the call came from the AG's office. They wanted a meeting. They wanted to talk about my uncle's cooperation. They were more interested in Ridgeview Trust than in Jim. They needed someone on the inside to explain how it worked. They were offering Jim a deal, limited immunity in exchange for full, truthful testimony about Ridgeview's operations. They were going after the system, not just the pawn. Jim's lawyer took the deal. My uncle would become a witness for the state. I sat in Marcus's office the day the settlement was finally signed. Jim's signature gave the conservation fund his half. My signature pledged my half to the easement. The farm was saved, but it was forever changed. It could never be subdivided, never be sold for development. It would be a farm and only a farm for as long as I lived and beyond. I felt no triumph, only a deep, profound exhaustion. I had my home, I had my legacy. And I had the smoking crater of my family where my uncle used to be. The criminal case proceeded without me. I was a witness, but not the main event. The story was now about Ridgeview Trust and the doctors on their list. As I tried to rebuild the farm that spring, planting a new season's crop with the Conservation Fund as my new silent partner, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I kept waiting for a sense of peace. It didn't come because the person who'd sent me that first envelope, the one who started the unraveling, was still out there. And one rainy afternoon in May, as I was fixing a fence, a truck pulled up the long driveway. It was Carl with a shotgun. It was a woman about my age. She got out, looked at the farmhouse, then walked straight toward me. She had my grandfather's eyes, and she said 7 words that made the entire world stop spinning. Hi, Sarah, I'm your cousin. My mother was your grandfather's secret daughter, and I think he left something for us too. The rain picked up, tapping on the brim of my hat. I just stood there, muddy fencing pliers in my hand, staring at this stranger who'd just rewritten my family's history. Your grandfather's secret daughter. The words didn't make sense. My grandfather Robert was the most straightforward man I knew, or so I thought. Your name, I finally managed. It's Chloe, she said. Chloe Bennett. My mother's name was Lena. I took her into the farmhouse kitchen, the same kitchen from that fateful dinner. She talked and I listened, my world reconfiguring itself in real time. Her mother, Lena, was from a town 40 miles away. She had a brief, intense relationship with my grandfather in the late 1970s before he'd married my grandmother. A child was born. My grandfather had provided support secretly for years. He'd even visited, but always discreetly. Lena had died of cancer 5 years ago. Chloe had known about her biological father her whole life, but respected her mother's wish not to disrupt his other family. She'd only come forward now because she'd seen the news about the court case, the will. She had a box of letters, photographs, and a birth certificate. The resemblance in the old photos was undeniable. He had her smile. "I'm not here for the farm," she said, watching me process it all. "I'm an architect in Chicago. I have my own life, but when I saw what your uncle tried to do, I had to do something. I thought you should know you weren't the only one he cut out." And then she told me she was the one who'd sent the envelope, the check. She'd been quietly monitoring Jim's finances for months, using skills I later learned she'd picked up working on fraud cases and city planning. She found the Ridgeview connection. She'd been my anonymous angel, tipping the scales. The weight of it was immense. My grandfather had another child, a whole branch of the family tree I never knew, and this woman, this stranger, had quietly helped save the land I loved. I didn't know whether to feel betrayed by Grandpa's secret or grateful for Chloe's intervention. Mostly, I just felt tired. The family I thought I was fighting for had never really existed. It was a phantom. He introduced Chloe to my grandmother. That was the hardest day. We sat in the parlor, the good china untouched. Grandma looked at the pictures, read a letter where my grandfather asked after the little one. Her hands shook, but her face was calm. She looked at Chloe, then at me. "I knew," she said, her voice quiet, "not about a child, but about Lena. He told me before we married. He said it was over, that it was a mistake from a lonely time. He promised it was just a part of his past." She took a deep breath. "He was a good man, flawed but good. This doesn't change that." Her forgiveness in that moment was the most powerful force I'd ever witnessed. It wasn't forgetting, it was choosing what to hold on to. Chloe stayed for a week. We walked the land. I showed her the pastures, the creek, the hill where her biological father proposed to my grandmother. It was awkward and sad and strangely healing. She left with an open invitation, a new cousin, and the closure she'd sought about her father. She didn't want a legal claim. She just wanted to be acknowledged, and she was. The legal machinations ground to their conclusions. With Jim's cooperation, the state built a strong case against the Ridgeview Trust operation. It made national news, a syndicate preying on aging landowners. Jim received immunity for his testimony. He sold his half to the conservation fund, paid his monstrous legal fees with what was left, and moved to Florida. He never spoke to me again. I heard through the grapevine he and Alina split up. The stress shattered them. I felt no joy in that. Just a hollow echo. Alina Vance was disbarred. Her career was over. The Missouri Bar Association used her case as a cautionary tale for years to come. The farm, my half now permanently preserved under the conservation easement, began its slow recovery. The debt was gone, the threat was gone, but so was the idea that this was purely a Millsbury legacy. It was something else now, a protected piece of earth with a tangled, painful human history. I hired a young farmhand, a kid from town who wanted to learn. The work was the same, the meaning had changed. My father, who had given me his share, started visiting more. We'd have coffee in the morning, not talking much, just being there. The silence between us was no longer empty, it was peaceful. He was processing his own grief for his father, for his brother, for the family that fractured. One day he brought over an old metal box he'd found in his attic. Inside were more of my grandfather's things, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it in Grandpa's handwriting. My hands trembled opening it. It was dated just a month before he got really sick. The letter was short. "Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if things went the way they should, you're running this place. I know I don't say it well, but you were the heart of this farm. Your Uncle Jim sees numbers, you see life. Don't ever let anyone tell you this isn't yours. There are things in my past I'm not proud of, secrets that make me less in your eyes. Forgive an old man his mistakes. Just love this land. It's the best part of me. Love, Grandpa." He'd written it before Jim campaign began, before the hospital bed. This was his true wish, untainted. I cried then for the first time in months. Not angry tears, grieving ones, for the grandfather I loved, the flawed man I was only now meeting, and for the simple wish he'd almost couldn't make come true. The final surprising detail came a year later. I was going through the farm's ancient ledgers looking for old crop rotation notes when a folded paper slipped out from the back of a volume from 1982. It was a handwritten agreement between Robert Millsbury and Lena Bennett. It granted Lena a lifetime tenancy on a 5-acre parcel at the far northern edge of the farm, a wooded plot by a spring, a place to build a cottage if she ever wanted. He'd signed it, she signed it. It was witnessed, a secret sanctuary promised but never claimed. The parcel was still part of the land, now under the conservation easement, forever wild. He hadn't forgotten her. He'd carved out a space for her in the only thing he truly owned. He just never told anyone. I drove out to that plot. It was beautiful, quiet, untouched. I called Chloe and read her the agreement. She was silent for a long time. He wanted her to have a place, she finally said, her voice thick. A place that was hers. We decided together to let it stay wild. A memorial for a love story that existed in the margins and for the woman who was my aunt. So what was the payoff? What did I win? I didn't get a pristine victory. I didn't get my old family back. I got a truth that was messier and heavier than the lie. I got a farm that can never be sold, which means it can never be stolen again. I got a scarred piece. I got a cousin. I got a father who shows up for coffee. I got a grandmother whose strength redefined forgiveness for me. The farm isn't a castle anymore. It's a fortress of a different kind. Its walls are legal easements. Its moat is the truth, however complicated, and I'm not just its heir, I'm its keeper. The battles with Jim, with the banks, with the shadows of Ridgeview Trust, they weren't about owning a thing, they were about becoming someone who could hold a complex truth without breaking, someone who could look at a scarred piece of land and a scarred family tree and say, this is mine, all of it. If you're waiting for a story where the villain goes to jail and the hero gets everything shiny and new, this isn't it. This is a story where the villain moves to Florida, the hero inherits a paradox, and the legacy is preserved precisely because it's no longer perfect. It's real. And that realness is the only foundation strong enough to build a future on. The future starts now. Not with a dramatic win, but with a quiet morning, the smell of earth after rain, and the understanding that some things are saved not by keeping them the same, but by letting them become what they were always meant to be. So what do you do when the story you've been fighting for turns out to be a different story entirely? You don't stop fighting, you just change what you're fighting for. I started this battle to claim my birthright, to win back what was promised. I ended it by signing papers that ensured this land could never be fully owned, never be sold by me or anyone else. In trying to take it all, my uncle forced me to make it forever. The irony is perfect. His greed led to its permanent protection. The very thing he wanted to commodify is now beyond price. The legacy isn't a clean line from my great-great-grandfather to me. It's a river with hidden tributaries, with a secret branch named Lena and a new branch named Chloe. It's a story with a shadowy company in the Caymans and a conservation fund in New York. It's a truth that includes a hospital bed signature and a love letter to a 5-acre wood. Holding all of that at once, the good, the bad, the secret, the sacred, that's the real inheritance. Not the deed, but the capacity to carry the whole weight of the truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever uncovered a family secret or fought for something only to find it transformed by the fight, I want you to know something. The victory isn't in getting exactly what you pictured. It's in becoming the person who can handle what you actually get. My grandfather's legacy wasn't a perfect farm passed to a perfect heir. It was a resilient piece of earth that survived the flaws of the people who loved it, and a lesson that sometimes protection is a more powerful form of possession than ownership. I'm Sarah Millsbury. The farm is still here. The story isn't over, it's just being written in a different way, and I'm finally at peace with that. If you want more stories about the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of families and the things they leave behind, make sure to subscribe. Tell me in the comments what your legacy is or what you're fighting to build. Thank you for listening to mine.